Sounds good.
Okay.
Thank you.
While we're waiting, I'm so excited to see everybody's faces. I miss you people.
It is. It's good. It seems like November was a very long time ago, so it is good to see everyone. I see Shonda and Senator Darneal. Bobby. We'll do obviously our usual roll call here soon. And Ruth. Hi, Ruth.
Hi, Ruth.
Hi there.
So former Representative Johnson tells me that he may be coming up for our dinner.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
I look forward to that.
me too.
All right, we have both our co-chairs here, Shonda as well as Representative Dent. So I'm going to get us started since everyone has had probably a long day. And as we know, some of you in the legislative hearings still have a day going as well. So just a reminder, welcome everybody, DCYF Oversight Board, our first full board meeting of the year. Glad to see everyone. Hi, Lonnie, I see the thumbs up. So just quick reminders, the same stuff from last year. We're pretty familiar with this. This is a board meeting, so we do ask everyone that's in public attendance, if you would like to, as a stakeholder or partner, to identify yourself in the chat box. We will make record of that, but only if you choose to. And then otherwise, please stay muted. If you would like to make a public comment during our meeting, we do have that time slotted for later in the agenda, and please just email Nicholas to let him know, and he will take care and manage that time accordingly. And if anyone is calling from the phone and they cannot see the screen that has Nicholas's email on it, you can go to our website, hopefully on a mobile device of some sort, DCYF Oversight .wa.gov. I'm getting emails and websites messed up, and you can navigate to contact there and find Nicholas's email there to submit public comment. So with that, we will do a quick agenda overview, and then I will do roll call for our board members, and we'll jump into a request for approval of the meeting minutes from our last meeting, and then hand it over to opening remarks for our new co-chairs. So Nick, can you go to the next slide just so we can all see the agenda? So just quick overview, opening, as we stated before, we have an hour and a half slotted to discuss and present a new framework for the DCYF Oversight Board. You have all board members got slide deck kind of walking through what that looks like just for prep materials. If we don't need that much time, that's fine. We'll obviously move through our agenda. I see that Patrick is on the call already, and that if we are a little bit early in our schedule, we can jump into that as well. For the time being, public comment is scheduled for 6:45. We will then hear from Patrick Dow, the Director of the Office of Family and Children Ombuds. He will be briefing the board on the 2020 annual report from his office. And then we will have time with the board members to ask any questions and have discussion with Patrick on recommendations and any of the data that's in that report. And then we will adjourn. So with that, I'm going to go through a quick roll call for board members. When I call your name, please just unmute and say here or present. So we'll start with Katie Byron.
Present.
Thank you. Annie Blackledge.
Present.
Thank you, Annie. Bobby Bridge.
Present.
Thanks, Bobby. Senator Jeannie Darneal.
Present.
Thank you. Representative Tom Dent.
Tom Dent's here.
Sydney Forrester. I know she had a conflict, so she might be joining a little bit later. Lonnie Greniger.
Here.
Hi, Lonnie.
Hey.
Ben DeHaan.
Here.
Hi, Ben.
Hi there.
Ruth Kagi.
Here.
Thank you, Ruth. Annie Lee.
Here.
Hi, Annie. Diane Lieb.
Diane Leby here.
Levy, sorry, I always get your last name wrong. I apologize. Levy, I will make sure I get that. Thank you, Diane. Charles Loeffler. Lois Martin. Shonda Selivanoff. Thank you, Shonda. I saw her do that. Representative Tana Sen. She might be in committee still. Let's see. Okay. And then Stacia Haller, AJ Stacia Haller. I knew that, just want to make sure the board knows you're on the call.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you, Stacia. And with that, Nick, can you pull up the minutes from our meeting so long ago, back in November? The meeting was mostly the co-chair elections and then the discussion and final approval of the report. All board members got this emailed earlier today as well. I would like to request a consideration for approval or a motion to approve the minutes.
I motion to approve.
Thank you, Diane.
Second.
Thank you, Katie. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any nays? Okay, motion's approved. Thank you. And with that, I'm very excited and very pleased to hand over our the stage, in a sense, to our new co-chairs, Representative Tom Dent and Shonda Slevenoff, both voted in by majority vote from all the board members back in November, and they are chairing their first full board meeting tonight. So take it away, co-chairs.
Sharonda, if you're talking, we can't hear you. Or Representative Dent.
Representative Dent,
I thought I'd unmuted, but apparently I clicked it and didn't have it on the microphone part. Anyway,
Perfect.
welcome everybody to the Oversight Board meeting of the DCYF. I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to be one of the new co-chairs serving with Sharonda. It is a pleasure and an honor. I think when we worked through this with Representative Kagi and we put together the House Bill 1661 and put together the Department of Children, Youth and Families, was one of the highlights so far at my time in the legislature. We negotiated on this really a lot for several months, and it was a great learning experience for me. It was great working with Representative Kagi, and I was real proud of what we put together, and the Oversight Committee was one of them. I'm proud of what we've done. And so we spent a couple of years here kind of educating the board and what goes on in many of the children's issues that we deal with in the DCYF deals with. But I would like to see us move into maybe to the next step. And we've talked, so Sharonda and I have spent a great deal of time working with Krista to put together a little different view of where we'll move forward so we can get into oversight. So in the bill, beginning from page 7 through page 11, I believe, it pretty much spells out what the Oversight Board is charged to do. And I didn't visit with you about this, Krista, but I would really like everybody to maybe take a look at that and get a feeling for what we do. And as we put together those subcommittees, that we look at what we're asked to do and then try to fit that in there so it works. And guys, I read through this again, and it made me feel even better about what we have accomplished when we did this. But the one that really stands out to me is on page 10, it's section 12. The Oversight Board for Children, Youth and Families has general oversight over the performance and policies of the department and shall provide advice and input to the department and the governor. And I think that kind of captures what we had talked about when we did this, and it really makes a lot of sense to me. So we're going to kind of change things just a little bit, but to do what we set out to do when we passed this legislation. So anyway, that's what I have to say tonight. Again, thank you for allowing me this honor to serve in this capacity. And I'm actually still in Transportation Committee, so I'm going to jump off and go back to Transportation because it's an important committee. It's a fiscal committee, and when Transportation is over, I'll be back. So you're not rid of me completely, but you'll be rid of me for a while. So thank you, and I'll see you in a little bit.
yeah, Sharonda, do you have? I can't hear you if you're not mutes. It looks like your mute's off, but I can't hear you at all, or we can't hear you. You're still muted, but it looked like your mute came off.
But we can't hear you.
Yeah, but we can't hear you if like the volume or the microphone's down or something.
Yeah, it happens to me sometimes. It might be on your computer rather than on the display board here.
Okay, she's gonna jump out and come back. Okay. So we'll give her a few minutes to do that so she can have opening remarks. We'll see if that works. How's everyone doing? I see smiles. That's good. That's good. It's been a few long weeks, I know already, but thumbs up, smiles.
Hey, can people hear me?
Yeah, is this Charles?
This is Charles. Yeah, sorry, my computer was having glitches as I tried to log on, so I'm on my phone, but I just wanted to say I am here.
Great, thank you, Charles. And Shonda's coming back.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, yay.
Welcome to technology. First of all, I just want to say thank you. I'm so excited to be in this fantastic position to all of you. I want to, did I go goodbye again?
You're back. You just froze.
Oh my
for a
God.
second, so you're
What's
back.
going on? I just want to say, I just want to thank Representative Kagi and Representative Sen for laying the foundation of this work. I think that the last 2 years have been a place for us to learn, grow, understand. The work has been already, we're charged with an incredible task, and that, we have these fantastic leaders that have laid the groundwork. I'm hoping that, our time together will just be more around seeing how we can best support the department, moving towards the measures that have been identified, and really being a part of the solution so that children and families all across Washington State have the opportunity to thrive, to be healthy and just have a great life. And I know that that's what's important to each and every one of us. So I'm just, thrilled to be on this journey with each of you and really looking forward to learning and growing. So I'm going to hand it over to Krista. I didn't really get to business like Representative Dent there. I just got some opening remarks, and then as the time passes, we'll kind of get some deep diving in there and get to work. So thank you, and I'm looking forward to coming up with a new way to possibly do some of this work so that we can feel that we're right in the middle and utilizing our time effectively to really create change that can be impactful to the families we serve. So I'm going to hand it back over to.
Thank you, Shonda, and so excited to have you in this role as well. So with that, and since we had some great opening remarks about a new direction or a new way to consider the work for the Oversight Board, I'm going to pull up on the screen the PowerPoint slides that were shared with the board members in the email already. So can everyone see the PowerPoint slide on the screen? Nods? Okay, thanks, Nick. Got a thumbs up. So just to echo what we heard from the co-chairs, there's a few questions that have popped up. And so we've really started to rethink how can the Oversight Board look at our work and come up with a product at the end of the year that really summarizes what our mandate is as a board, as well as to really have an effective impact as well. And I want to echo that this absolutely is built off of our previous co-chairs' work and bringing this group together. I think that we all acknowledge that with the Oversight Board, we faced a lot of the same challenges as DCYF has as well, which is bringing 3 different groups from 3 different agencies together and trying to have a cohesive whole with shared knowledge and shared understanding of what that whole looks like. It takes time. And we've really gotten to shape this work from all that feedback and all that work that we've done over the last year and a half of meetings, but essentially a couple of years of existence. So today, our objectives with this first agenda item are really to answer these 3 questions I have here on the screen. So why are we proposing a new work plan? We'll go into a little bit about the feedback that we've received and how this has shaped this new proposed direction. We'll talk specifically about what that proposal is, and then we'll talk about what next steps are as well. And after I go through this, I will allow time. If board members, if you have questions as I'm going through the slide, please feel free to ask for clarification or throughout the slide deck itself. And then at the end, we'll also open it up for further conversation and discussion for the board as well. So with that, the first point of feedback that is fair for all board members to know is that the governor's office did not approve our report for a second year in a row. Sydney's been really great with providing some of that constructive feedback on why that's the case. And she really pointed to this part of our legislation. And I realized I didn't put the RCW on this page, but it's RCW 43.216.015, subsection 19, as you see here. And that is, the report really needs to do a review of the performance measures that are listed in the legislation founding both DCYF, but also the board, and really say how DCYF is doing those performance measures. We've done a lot of work around the stated outcomes and recommendations on how to improve performance, but we haven't necessarily done that report card type of approach to the work, which is to say, how is DCYF doing with what the data says as far as trends and so on and so forth. And I do take responsibility for that, obviously being the report writer. So this is something we really want to take this year to build up to and be able to have it in this next year's report, where the governor's office would like to see that more or less objective report card report out. Anyone have any questions about this feedback that we got from the governor's office in our report?
Yeah, this is Lonnie.
Yeah.
Okay, it's after 5 o'clock, so I'm trying to figure out a delicate way to say this. But when I see that kind of feedback from the governor's office, it makes me feel like our purpose as an oversight board is very, very narrow. Like we're just here to make sure that they follow the exact, measures that are listed out. But when we come together as an oversight board, I think we're seeing some different realities and maybe am I making sense?
You are making sense. And I think that, and we'll get through what some of this proposal might get to some of that. So it includes stakeholder engagement, includes hearing what's really going on, how the oversight board can play a role in saying, okay, maybe data is showing performance in this area, but what's going on with families and children and providers. So we do have different tasks and obligations and duties as a board that we can practice. I think this is a way to just keep us streamlined and focus on making sure we're covering what the basic requirements of saying whether or not DCYF is doing what it was created to do. And those stated outcomes, as we come back to often, are quite robust. They cover from the early learning, child welfare, JR, and obviously eliminating racial and ethnic disparities throughout. So they're quite robust. And this is really for us to keep a focus and a way to move forward in the work that keeps us from, struggling with what flight level to look at or what program to look at, because there's so much within the department to cover. So this is really kind of like just that yardstick of what line can we walk to make sure we continue this work, but keep a focus and a work plan to follow, if that makes sense.
It does. So could I ask this then? And I want to say that we discussed this in a smaller work group when we were going over the report, which is, can we have, maybe it's Sydney, the governor's office has denied our report 2 years in a row. I think somebody from the governor's office needs to come and give us a little more commentary on what exactly they're looking for then, because if we missed it 2 years in a row, that makes me think that, we missed a direction or something, or we have different views of our purpose or something.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know I talked to Sydney last week and she's more than happy to. She has a conflict today, which wouldn't get her here until 6:30 if she can make it. So, but she's willing to absolutely share this feedback broader. And I think what you just touched on, which is accurate, which is, I think all of us, and I'm talking not only the board members, but beyond board members, have different ideas of what oversight is.
Yeah.
And this really is kind of saying, okay, what can we do as an oversight board that's an independent, objective body? And that's really to say, this is what we expected from DCYF, or those that created DCYF and created that legislation. many of our members, obviously on the board as well, really said, this is what we expect of this new department. And can we have a body that determines whether or not they're achieving that? And that gets back to the measures.
Right.
And then really grounds, I think, a lot of the guidance the board wants to provide with what Representative Dent mentioned earlier, that general oversight on policies. Looking at those performance measures helps ground that guidance in a little bit more of a foundation that would be leverage in which to say, based on this review and understanding how they're performing or not, or on track or needs improvement, the board recommends this based on this logic model. So it's a little bit more of an in-depth and a way to base that work.
Right. Okay.
I think it also will help us to focus on data.
Mhm.
And I think, we all support really making decisions based on data, but DCYF was so new, it really didn't have much data and was developing the framework for what the data was going to be. So I really think this is going to benefit us tremendously to be able to use the data kind of as our starting point. It gives us a kind of a way to access the other issues and keep us focused on where things really are not producing the outcomes we wanted and what needs to change to get to those outcomes.
Yeah, and I would just like to add too, particularly to Lonnie's point. I mean, I think where we have been missing perhaps is that the quantitative part, let's say that, which is extraordinarily important. I mean, it's the whole purpose behind the Office for Innovation Alignment, et cetera, and the key to not letting the reality collide with perception, if you will, and try to mesh both of them. But I guess I felt that this doesn't narrow. I guess this is the description that Lonnie that I don't think we should worry about. I mean, Ruth has just said why we need this quantitative data, why we didn't have it, because the department really has not had it and they've been getting up to speed. But look at that last phrase, which is not underlined, and must also include a review of the department's strategic plan, policies, and rules. And see, it seems to me that there is a whole avenue there about qualitative data, which is also of concern to us. Qualitative data is also data. And I think that may help us. So I don't think it's an attempt to narrow our job. I think it's just to make it more precise. You do have to have quantitative as well as the qualitative. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you to you both for explaining that. Thank you. Yeah.
Yes.
Krista, this is Ben. Would it be accurate to say that the governor's office wants us to, at a minimum, deal with these specific outcome measures, but that doesn't preclude us from developing additional ones should they be necessary based on either what we learn or how things change within the agency? Would that be an accurate statement?
Yeah, I do think that's an accurate statement. I think this is in the legislation, so that's the kind of minimum expectation. We'll see as we go through the slides today that there's the plan that we have developed for the year really starts with the measures that currently exist and actually the ones that the department is using in their strategic plan to help guide their work. So we're going to start with those, and then we're going to kind of move into the performance measures that are in the legislation, but maybe not priority focus in the department strategic plan. And then kind of a third quarter focus would actually be the beginning of the work to develop measures that, at least with the legislation, I wouldn't say a lot, but there's several state outcomes that don't have identified performance measures in the legislation itself. And that's where the board can play a great role in working with the department to help develop those. And then beyond that, as you said, as things develop and emerge with the department and things go a new direction, absolutely, we can recommend measures or recommend what the department might be held to in that regard. But really, it's kind of coming back to DCYF came into being a few years ago, and we want to kind of check in and say, you're created to make progress in these areas. How are you doing? And we haven't fully done that with the quantitative side of it. We've done qualitative, and that will continue to supplement that moving forward. But yes, this is a minimum of what we need to be doing versus what we can do beyond that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And so with that additional feedback, some of you might be familiar with this and as board members, individuals are being in certain meetings where things have been said, but we have, beyond what we've heard from the governor's office with regards to the report itself, we have heard that the oversight board has not done quote unquote a lot of oversighting. I've heard this from individual board members. I've heard this from other stakeholders where we often hear, what are we going to do about something? And then also DCYF leadership itself has also made this comment, not to say we need to change and our work based on that. But I think, again, this gets back to everyone has an idea, different idea of what oversight is. And the proposal here with this work is really helping us just what are our parameters and what are we operating in, and begin to share that with everyone so people know what that lane is that the oversight board is working in. And then since the beginning, I mean, we've all struggled with this. Everyone has different ideas or agenda items that they want to hear about more or have different maybe points of view or policy areas. So having us decide as a board that we have limited time together, what to focus on in a given year, and then also at what flight level. We've seen that has been a struggle as well, because again, DCYF has so much that it's responsible for, and everyone on this board has such expertise in their areas they're bringing forward. We've just, it's been hard for us to make that a framework that is a standardized framework. And so again, going back to this original legislation on those state outcomes and those performance measures really does map out a way to focus our work and really say that this is a charge that we can take on as a board. And then obviously, as mentioned, we can grow from there, but this is getting back to those basics.
And I would say in our defense that, let me see, I'm going to put my face on here, I guess, that at least for 2020, COVID sort of put a huge ringer in whatever even if we had done this in an intentional way, chances are we are plan to do this kind of, I don't know what you would call it, but more intentional focus on particular areas, we would have abandoned it anyway because of what was happening with COVID.
Absolutely. And I know that the board, everyone on here is very, cares a lot about being responsive to the public and our stakeholders as well. And I think that obviously if we weren't paying attention to what's going on with COVID, that would not be very representative of what people are interested in knowing the department's doing. So thank you, Bobby. So with this, so what's the proposal? So the proposal is really to do a rather performance report card approach. And to accomplish this, so again, we'll look at in later slides, break this down a little bit so we can be reminded of what actually is in the legislation and what these subcommittees would look like. But it really would be to say, hey, DCYF, you're required to perform and improve performance in this area. How are you performing? What are you doing about it? What's the response? And taking that level of oversight. So really taking the legislation to guide those inquiries, but also making a determination on whether or not the department is performing. And there's various levels of that I'll get to in a later slide of what the subcommittee structure would be tasked to do. But here's kind of the structure that's being proposed, which is we move away from doing monthly full board meetings and into a more heavy subcommittee structure. So this would be 3 subcommittees, approximately 2 to 4 board members each. So this would not be large subcommittees. We really want to have board members focused on the work, and it would be probably more flexible with regards to that. And I've outlined here three group areas based on what the state outcomes kind of group into in a very common sense manner. These by no means have to be the title of these subcommittees. And I actually would recommend that once people identify what a subcommittee they would like to partake in, that subcommittee could then decide what the title is. So these are not set in stone, except for the fact that it just makes sense. It kind of falls along the lines of these 3 areas based on what the legislation is requiring for those outcomes. And I want to make it very clear that there are 8 outcomes, as we know, and one of the absolute most important one is eliminating racial and ethnic disparities throughout all systems. So these subcommittees are aligned based on program area and focus, with the expectation that every one of those subcommittees would be looking at how the department is doing in eliminating racial and ethnic disparities in each one of those subcommittee focus areas. So that one's blended throughout all 3. It wouldn't be a separate subcommittee. It would be something that would be for all inquiries. And with this structure, we would be doing monthly subcommittee meetings with the exception of full board months, and then have the full board come together on a quarterly basis. And part of this, and that I skipped over the third bullet, but part of wanted to say that schedule first is because part of the feedback we've also received is with our stakeholder engagement, we've heard a desire from both board members and stakeholders to have some kind of venue in which providers, stakeholders, families, youth can come talk to oversight board members that aren't in the public setting. So as requirement for the Open Public Meetings Act, when we have a majority of board members together to talk board business, we absolutely are open and welcome to the public. And so if we have these smaller subcommittees, it gives us a little bit of flexibility. I'm not saying that people, stakeholders in that couldn't come and join those meetings as well. That's absolutely an option. It just means if there was a decision to have more of a conversation with a few board members about a topic, that would be, we wouldn't have those same OPMA requirements that would put it more in a public venue that we've heard maybe not as comfortable for some individuals that would like to talk to board members. So I think going to a subcommittee structure would really support that. And then we'd also figure out as a subcommittee structure what stakeholder engagement we'd like to elevate to the full board meetings as well. So we would be able to do it in both venues and gives us that flexibility to do that. So this is the structure that we're proposing. I'm going to jump to the next slide and then open it up to any questions about what's here, because I think the next slide helps. Well, this grounds us a little bit more into what I'm talking about with the actual state outcome. So this is not meant to be legible. I do realize it showed up a little bit bigger on the slides here, but this is really just to orient. So if this is in the legislation, this is the very beginning of the legislation that created DCYF. And what I've put a box around are the outcomes with the identified performance measures. So this is foundational to what DCYF is expected to be with those that created it. And so this is just grounding us back to why are we starting here, because that's part of the mandate of the Oversight Board. And so I'll go through this slide and then I'll open up for further questions or discussion. We've got more slides, but I just want to make sure I do take pauses. So if we go to the subcommittee structure, these are some of the expectations of what those subcommittees would do within those given focus areas. So definitely performance measure review. The department has several of their measures in some format on the dashboard. There are some that are not. There are some that are in their strategic plan. So this is really to ground board members in what is the performance measure showing, particularly from previous agency performance into the DCYF structure itself. So that would be definitely a cornerstone part of the work for the board members on the subcommittees. Another part of the work could be is how is DCYF utilizing this performance information when they're in their work, their decision-making, management decisions, so on and so forth. So are they really using that performance measure data to help guide decisions for the department to make sure that they do improve performance? Requesting, responding, or recommending targets and timelines. So that's something that's often missing, I think, from some agency performance metrics is what are the expectations then? So what are we trying to achieve? So if you have a certain level of performance, what is the goal? What's the target that we're trying to achieve? And then what's the timeline associated with that? And I think that's a key part the board could play a role in, is kind of setting out those, really defining those expectations for the department and what the progress should be and in what timeline. And that'll take partnership and working with DCYF to fully understand and stakeholders and everyone else, what would be practical as well as meaningful. The subcommittees would also do a determination of what's on track, needs improvement, or off track. So really, again, looking at the performance data and deciding, is DCYF going off track at this point? Like, is everyone focused on this other area and this seems to be slacking? So really, again, going back to that report card kind of sense, which is really looking good. We need to focus on this more, maybe put some more resources or attention into it, or way off track. We need to maybe shift strategy.
Hey, Krista, does this, I don't know, it looks to me, and maybe I'm, I don't know, misreading it, but are you expecting then that these subcommittees, we would be developing like a dashboard for the department?
It's a great question. I've been thinking about this. So they have their own dashboard, and actually part of in our legislation, as well as a requirement of the board, is to work with DCYF to make sure that their data and their performance data is accessible to the public. One piece of work that does need to be done is that the current agency performance dashboard, it has a lot on it. It's not super consumable, and it does not have some of this information. So targets and timelines, on track, off track, any of that. So I don't know if I suggest that the Oversight Board necessarily has its own dashboard. We could host it on our website and kind of be that report card types, structure, or we could be working with the department to help kind of streamline and clean up what their dashboard looks like and make sure that some of these elements show up on there as well.
Yeah, well, it's, if they don't have on-track needs improvement and off-track, then it's not a dashboard. My
Right.
humble, yeah, but anyway, okay.
Yeah, but I agree with you. I think that's a tool that could be better utilized. And so some of the data is on the website, but we could definitely work with them to make it more consumable for the public and really also very easily to just identify if the goals for the legislation are being met or not.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks.
Krista, this is Ben. Do we have any sense at all about the proportion of the outcome measures that actually have data attached to them? Because I know that as a board, we've requested, or at least in our dialogue, asked questions about things that aren't being tracked currently, and it became a resource question. So I guess another way of saying it is, what level of commitment exists to expand data collection in areas that are necessary for us to do our job, even though it's not in the DCYF budget?
That's a good question. I mean, the budget question, I think is a separate question. As far as the commitment, I have talked to Vicki about this. I've briefed Vicki on this idea. And I know that when we had the Oversight Strategy Subcommittee meeting back in early December, I think that was a question you all had about what's the availability of OIAA and their resources to help support, not help support, but provide the board what the board's asking for. And then work with the board in that development. And Vicki seemed very committed and very on board with it, particularly because they acknowledge that there are, and we'll go through some of the state outcomes here in a few minutes to identify where we don't have metrics or data tied to, say, adolescent outcomes. So there's one that's improve adolescent outcomes. There are some specifics under there, but there's not necessarily identified measures that really reflect meaningfully if that's being achieved. And so the department, from working with OIAA and Dr. Ybarra, has had expressed actually great interest in that partnership with the board to help develop that. As far as budget goes for collecting data that isn't being collected, and that, I mean, I think that's a conversation farther down the road and will obviously be difficult in this climate with the budget right now. But I know that the department has been working on their equity report, and we've been waiting for that to be fully published, but they do a really good job of covering and mapping out what data is being collected in what areas as far as the racial and ethnic data, but it also can show you across how many databases and where they'd like to go and how they streamline some of that work. So definitely a conversation to continue having, but they're opening to what this is proposing at this time.
I see. Okay, thank you.
I just am looking at the measures for early learning, and I think we just need to acknowledge at the outset that COVID is going to have a major impact, because WAKIDS data is the first indicator and early achievers is the second, and both of those have basically been suspended during COVID. So I think there will really be some challenges for this go round, but it's just, we're going to have to work with it.
Absolutely. And
early learning in particular, it's really going to be a challenge.
Absolutely. And by all means, as a board, we can reflect that and we can acknowledge that and know that, in particular times, we want to make sure that we take account of that and what those expectations are. But I think it was actually Diane, and I apologize, Diane, for quoting you from a meeting we had a few months ago, but I think you were the one that pointed out this is actually the exact time where we should be doing this because of those gaps and those drops in COVID, and to make sure there's eyes on all these areas to make sure that we can work with the department to get that performance back up when possible, obviously with certain restrictions in place. So I apologize, Diane, for quoting you out of turn.
That's fine. I actually had a question, a follow-up to what Ben was saying, which is I'm very interested in this new structure in terms of the ability to maybe be more active partnership with DCYF staff themselves. And so I wondered if there was any thought you had, and maybe this isn't the time to reflect on this quite yet, but in terms of what would be our expectations when we're having these, for example, subcommittee meetings. Would we have DCYF staff present? Would we would we have like a partner in the organization? I'm thinking like in early learning, we might want somebody like Kelly Bohannon or Judy King or somebody like that present. And I just wondered if you had thought about anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's going to be flexible. When I talked to Dr. Ybarra about this, she was happy to provide OAA staff herself or those that work for her for the data piece, but she did specifically when we talked about looking at what are the action plans, logic models, strategies that the department is using to target improving performance in that area, that she would want to specifically request other DCYF staff to be present to speak to that. So absolutely, yes. I mean, one thing I do want to make sure that we are continuing to balance, because I know the board cares about this a lot, is also not just talking to DCYF. So that's that stakeholder engagement piece as well. And so working out how that all works out, I think is going to be something a little bit of a trial and error, but the intended goal would be, let's work with DCYF, figure out what their data says, understand what their action plans and logic models are to improve that targeted performance area, and then also do a stakeholder engagement and partner work to say, if the DCYF is planning to do this, does this make sense to you? And what's your experience? And is this going to see the outcomes that they're aiming for from your perspective? But yeah, the subcommittee meetings with small subcommittees too, I anticipate there'll be much more flexibility in scheduling and, you know, the ability to kind of pull those groups together and have conversations with DCYF in a meaningful way, not just to spend time, obviously, but that would be the intent and goal, is to have a much more intimate connection there with DCYF present. Yeah. So I think looking at this, I just touched on a few more of those bullet points. So the stakeholder engagement piece could be flexible, working with DCYF to design and develop performance metrics that are currently not identified in the RCW. And then at full board meetings, the subcommittees would then report out anything of significance. So obviously there's going to be work being done, but if there's anything that the board wants to, the subcommittees want to make a point the full board knows about, and anything, of course, that would require action. So any votes on, you know, recommendations or identifying on track, off track, and what we do with that data moving forward would come to a full board meeting every quarter. So this is just a visual flow to show where the work will happen. So again, most of the work is going to happen in the subcommittee structure, titles to be determined, full board meetings happening quarterly, where there's going to be the subcommittee report outs, stakeholder voice and engagement as deemed necessary by the subcommittees. And we could do, this also might be an opportunity, we just have panels like we've had in past meetings where we really get a robust voice from groups that we want to hear from for the whole board to hear, and especially on the public platform. And also we can ask DCYF about follow-ups and action plans at that point from previous meetings and conversations, and then voting on any action. And then the report would be the annual product summarizing, rolling up all that. So that report card, suggesting new measures or data to be collected to ascertain whether or not progress is being made in identified areas. And then again, rooting any of that guidance that the board would like to make to see improvement just in a more of a structured foundation. So whether it's a logic model the board has or specific expertise or citations of research that we know about, but just to say, we realize there needs to be more work done in this area to see improvements, and this is what the board recommends DCYF would look to do, or so on and so forth. So still maintaining parts of our previous report, but making sure we really ground it in this performance measure review report card style. So I'm going to, so the next few slides, so I guess I'll pause there real quick. Is there any questions about the structure? Any further questions about what was just proposed, about what the subcommittees would be doing, what the year would look like as far as structure and meetings, and what the end goal would be? Okay, and obviously if they come up, just feel free to stop me. So the next few slides just break down what that legislation says in the meeting, or in the, excuse me, the founding legislation. So we have those 3 different subcommittees that I've outlined, and this is word for word from the RCW of what we expect to see DCYF do. So the first one really focused on that childhood development and school readiness. As Ruth mentioned, the first one is looking at WA kids and the assessment for kindergarten readiness. And then there are a focus on the early learning, the number of children that are in early achievers level 3 or higher, quality standard providers, as well as the number of licensed childcare available. So that would be, this right here would be that yardstick and that guideline for that subcommittee to focus on for this first year. and how they focus on each one and dive deeper into what's going on there. You'll see in a future slide, but this would be that where you'd start. So anyone that might be interested in looking at the subcommittee, this is what the focus would really guide us through that work. Similarly, the next subcommittee, which actually has a few more to look at, would be covering the preventing child abuse and neglect. So this is an example where we talked about state outcomes that don't have associated measures already identified with them. I know this is something we've talked about a lot, but how do you measure prevention? How do you know? But that would be a place where the board could really play a part in really deciding how to hold DCYF accountable to prevention by identifying what that measure could be. And then we have obviously improving youth safety, permanency, and well-being with a number of identified measures. So these are examples where DCYF is collecting all these, is already reporting on these. Several of these do show up in their strategic plan, but also, you know, the board can play a role in having a much more even eye on all of them and not letting one get more focus than the other. And then obviously we have reunification and reunifying with family of origin. So this would be what the second subcommittee would focus on throughout the year and digging deeper into that. And again, all of these would be looking at disparities throughout all these systems. So looking at race and ethnicity data through all subcommittee focus areas and performance measures. Then the third subcommittee would be looking at adolescent outcomes and young adult transitions. And so this is one where we see the first couple of the outcomes, again, don't necessarily have specific identified measures tied to them in the legislation. We have increasing school graduation rates, of course, but it's a coordination, reducing future demand for mental health and substance abuse use disorder. Again, how do we measure that? And how do we hold DCYF accountable to that? And then the last one has more concrete identified measures that the DCYF currently is reporting on. But again, how can we just make sure we have a very honed focus on that and understanding what's going on and how they're performing in those areas. So those are the three subcommittee focus areas just based on the yardstick from the legislation and what those subcommittees would be investigating and working with DCYF on. And so I kind of posed like, how do we accomplish this? I wanted to think strategically, since there is a lot in each one of those, how do we go through that? And I was thinking through how to partner with DCYF the best way possible. And it really would be to start where DCYF is at right now, and that's what their strategic plan. So they are in another iteration of their strategic plan they're trying to finalize, and they do have some of these measures in that strategic plan, and they have those focus areas that actually align with these subcommittee focus areas. So it's actually quite a nice setup. But we could start with them this next couple months, really looking at what measures are they using, what are the expectations, helping define that target and timeline, and then understanding the action plan as a result to really see that strategic plan come to life and mean something. And then the next, after that first few months of focus, expand to what other measures that are not currently a priority focus within the strategic plan, but are still part of that legislation, not the ones we just looked at, and keeping an eye on those to do the same work, identifying how DCYF is performing in those areas. And then from there, the next step would be to look at what outcomes are in the legislation but don't currently have identified performance measures to review. And that's where we could do a lot of partnership with DCYF to help identify and develop those new metrics and outcomes. So that's the strategy of how to approach this work and make sure we get through all of it in a year. And here is just the proposed schedule for the year and how that would actually roll out. So again, you see for each subcommittee, February, March is specifically looking at those measures that are in the strategic plan that DCYF has. And those are each one of those to create a high quality B through 8 system, safely reduce children in out-of-home care, and create successful transitions to adulthood are the actual intent priorities that DCYF has identified that they're focusing on in those in their strategic plan. So spending those first couple of months looking at the strategic plan measures and their performance in those areas, then scaling out to the other performance measures, and then finally also working on what's in the legislation that doesn't currently have measures that need to be developed. And then we wrap up the year with recommendations and finalizing the report that then could be utilized ideally by all other groups to help leverage what their agendas may be by identifying where DCYF is or is not performing, and then take the work from there. I will pause. Any questions on this? I know it's a lot of information. Additional thoughts?
I'll just say this is great work, Krista, and the team who helped put it together. This makes sense to me. This feels like the right direction. So thank you all, and thank you, Krista, for hurting us humans.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I totally agree. This is concrete and something we could get our arms around.
I want to just ask a couple of technical questions, Krista. So let's go that we move forward and we're in February. We have these 3 subcommittees and we have yourself and Nicholas. So one, I'm looking for what are the types of supports in all of these meetings, because there would need to be all types of documentation or notes and kind of circling back. So I'd be curious about that. And then question number 2 is in regarding the stakeholder participation. Would we propose an announcement? Like, how would you get the stakeholders to possibly be a part of the subcommittee? And is there a cutoff? Like, what is the criteria? Because I am just concerned that we might have a lot of people, and then I think that would hinder our ability to kind of get through a lot of stuff. So just kind of some of the logistics around what this committee would look like if we went forward.
Great questions. Thank you. Yeah. As far as the first one, as far as the workload, I'm not concerned between Nicholas and I being able to do that. It will definitely be more workload, but there's not concern there. I think that with all the documentation, again, moving to a smaller group structure, it takes a lot of work to pull full board meetings together and getting everyone on the same page and getting everything out there. And when we get to these smaller subcommittee meetings that are going to happen more frequently, it's just going to be a shift in where the work goes. And that doesn't concern me. And I've talked to Nicholas a lot about this, and thank Nicholas, because he often is the one to, pull up all the pieces and make everything happen magically. But we're very actually excited about it because we think it's a robust agenda, and that workload is not a concern as of yet. Of course, we could get into it and might have to make some strategic decisions, but the way that we're foreseeing it, it's not a concern as far as resources on our end. Your second question is a great one. My initial thoughts were a few months back, we talked about with the full board that we would do more engagement with board members on actually designing the agendas for each board meeting. And I want to carry that forward with the subcommittees as well. So it would be consultation with subcommittee members about this is what, as staff, we want to achieve in a meeting, but also how do we design that and structure that? And it could take the form of subcommittee members suggesting how to recruit for stakeholder engagement in that way, or it could be or. So we could have specific out requests for individual stakeholders that then we could do reach out and planning for the meeting as we would do our regular meetings, which just means sometimes cold calls and emails. And, as long as we get names and recommendations, we follow up. And the other thing we thought about is that even though we're not required to be open, obviously, we would put on our website, we are going to develop the website more to have a structure to support the subcommittee work. And we would identify then when meetings are happening and what the specific agenda or topic area is, and then provide contact information. So if stakeholders wanted to join, they could reach out to us as staff, and then we could work with the subcommittee to figure out what would make most sense. And not to discourage stakeholders, of course, but just to make sure that that time would be the most strategically used as possible. Also with knowing we also want to have stakeholder panels and engagement at full board meetings as well. So there's more to figure out, but I think that we can I would like to work with the subcommittee members on what they think would make sense. And then we could have various methods in which we could open that door and then have invitations for stakeholders to join, either to present or, provide testimony or whatever it is that we would like to hear in those subcommittee meetings.
I've got one last question, super quick, just in consideration. In the time, what type of timing do you think that the time commitment we would be asking for members to do, to be a part of these subcommittees? And
great question. I think, when I'm thinking about subcommittee meetings, I'm thinking in 90 minutes, max 2 hours of a meeting, then that would be per month. And that would also depend, of course, on, and that would be structured meeting time. And then I could see probably fluidly, just depending on the subcommittee members and how that works, just the amount of kind of conversation back and forth or what input comes might be a little bit loose here and there. But I would anticipate 90 minutes to 2 hours per monthly meeting. And that's why I want to make sure that we would schedule that time accordingly and strategically to make use of that time. So it would be a little bit less than our current monthly board meetings, but also again, smaller, a little bit more informal, wouldn't have as many of the requirements that the OPMA requires of these larger board meetings. So hopefully wouldn't be as big of a lift. And maybe that's the staff's perspective. Maybe that's not the same for board members. I do acknowledge that. That's what I anticipate. And again, we might feel it out a little bit more as we go, but I think we could do a lot in the 90 minutes, possibly 2 hours when we're focusing on these very specific areas that we have data around.
I have a question, and maybe it fits in with, maybe I'm not understanding the full scope of the second half of Sharonda's question, but you know, we use stakeholders and community. We differ those terms sometimes, and sometimes I think we conflate them. I don't know to what extent they're different, but assuming they are, we do have this obligation to go out to the community and, you know, test the water, you know, get input, et cetera. Do you think this structure is going to provide time for us, or to provide opportunity for us to satisfy that responsibility?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, as far as how we've done it, again, we're working in a COVID world. So obviously when we all went to Wenatchee back in August of 2019, that was a very different way of doing stakeholder work and going to be and talk to people and see regional differences and so on and so forth than what we're able to do under COVID. But with COVID, and I think most people have also gotten, hopefully to some degree, more comfortable with the stakeholder engagement on a electronic method. But I don't see it would, I actually think it would supplement, to be honest, the stakeholder engagement we've done, just because, again, I've heard from a few different sources that there's a desire for some stakeholders to come talk to a few board members in a more intimate setting, or maybe they don't feel as safe to talk at a full board meeting that's open to the public, where we might have DCYF leadership in attendance or other presenters. And so this would supplement, I believe, the stakeholder engagement we've already done, which has been quite robust with some of our panels. It just would do it in a way that we could meet people where their needs are at too, if that makes sense. So I'm not worried about this being an issue with that. I think it would actually improve it.
Krista, this is Stacia, if I could.
Yes, please, Stacia.
I do just need to make sure the board is aware that the Open Public Meetings Act does apply to subcommittees in certain settings, depending on what type of activity the subcommittee is involved in. One of those areas is if the subcommittee is taking testimony on behalf of the larger group. In that setting, the OPMA does apply. So I would just say we'd want to look really closely at particularly activities that are occurring at different meetings and determine whether or not they were subject to the OPMA. Doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means that you would have to give notice of the meeting, and the public would need to be allowed to attend. Okay. But I just want to make sure that there is awareness that there are times where OPMA is still going to apply.
Okay, thank you for that. And so that, just a clarifying question. So when you say testimony that would apply to the full board, that would be if there was testimony to be provided that would inform or be of importance to the full board to hear, is when OPMA would apply.
Yes, I mean, I would want to do a little more research and flesh it out a little bit more, because, you know, I'm just looking at this now kind of on the fly. But yes, I'd want to take a look at what the case law exactly is to find that area. But I just didn't want to let it go by without saying there is the potential that OPMA may apply in certain circumstances. Really would need to flesh out the details of that as we go on.
Makes sense. Okay.
So Stacia, this is a Representative Dent. Could you Representative Dent here, could you maybe put together maybe a short description of when we would be subject to the Open Meetings Act and when we would not be? You know, and that would be helpful, and maybe even the context. Let's say that Ruth and I and Sharonda decided to meet with some stakeholders that had concerns where we were headed. You know, would that be subject to the Open Meetings Act? Things like that, so we'd have a plan. Sure. So we don't step over the line.
Absolutely, I'd be glad to do that.
Thank you. And I have a question here for you, Krista. When we're talking about, we get in these subcommittee meetings now, refresh my memory, but it seemed like we will probably remain on the virtual program even after we open back up with the subcommittee meetings. Is that correct? Is that our plan, or did we have a plan?
Does anyone have a plan? No, I'm just joking. I think, yes, that's the plan for now. Again, there is structure, there is requirements from the Open Public Meetings Act to be able to hold a space in person for those when it is open to the public for people to come in attendance for public. It does not mean board members need to do it. It means staff needs to be able to provide that. The way that we see it as staff, this has been, actually, we've had the highest amount of participation and attendance from board members because it's easier to join electronically. So that would be something that we definitely want to continue to support as much as possible. Whether or not we start having in-person options, we'll roll with as far as what that requirement is with the OPMA, the waivers and proclamations that are being extended. But yeah, for me, I anticipate that most of that subcommittee work, particularly when it is just a subcommittee, would definitely be like Zoom electronic meetings because it seems to fit in with schedules a little bit better.
Okay, thank you.
This is Annie. I don't know if raising your hand virtually is the way to do it, but I'll just jump in. I just want to say how much I appreciate the structure laid out like this. It's really helpful to kind of see the pace and direction of the work. There was a mention earlier around the through line of racial equity, and I just wonder if we can also be more explicit as we talk about measures so that it doesn't get lost in the mix for each of the subgroups that are being proposed. I think it's really important to make sure that we're looking at that data, and I know the department is collecting it, so that visibility is I think really important to see whether or not the outcomes and the indicators are having a disparate impact, so that we can be curious about that. I also, just given the fact that the governor has rejected the past couple of annual reports, is the scope of the look going to be backwards a few years so that we can maybe address some of what we might not have done? I just think that might be a helpful way to kind of not just look at current data, but what was being collected, or what were the assumptions before it might be able to draw together the work that we might have missed doing in the last couple of years. And then my last comment is just on the stakeholder input. I do feel like it would be helpful to have a conversation about what people mean by that. And from my perspective, it does feel like data can tell you a picture, tell you a story, but for the story to be really fleshed out, I would really love to hear how people experience the DCYF that might not be as clear through the numbers, but might be important to know about and to fill out our sort of oversight of the kinds of performance measures that we're looking at. It may be that your numbers look good, but your culture and your practice aren't, or vice versa. You're doing a really fantastic job, but your outcomes aren't hitting the marks, and that might still be okay. And I'd like to really hear from people who are experiencing the department, at all levels, service providers and also young people and families who are encountering the system.
Yeah, Annie, thanks. That's where I was trying to get with that question.
Yeah, great recommendations from all around. And I will make sure, Annie, for your first point, to make sure that every time that we do have anything about subcommittees, that we do highlight the focus and intentionality behind looking at the data on the disparities and disproportionality by race and ethnicity. I think that's true, even though we say it just to make sure it shows up every single time in every one of those committees as a priority focus area. And then absolutely the retroactively looking at performance over the last year or two that we haven't done in our report, going back and acknowledging that without question. And I see this a lot as trend data as well. I think there are some new measures that might not have historical data attached to it, but where we do, we will definitely acknowledge that trend data and line it up with obviously the creation of DCYF and where we've seen progress at different times and an understanding of why too. I think that also helps us if we do see performance improving, knowing why that's the case as well, and getting that background, and then supplementing, of course, like we said, the quantitative with the qualitative and getting that personal experience. So thank you. Yeah, we'll take all of those for sure.
I had one other thing that I just wanted to throw out there, which is more our responsibility as board members. I feel like if you're breaking us down into subcommittees like this, it's our responsibility as a board member to be on one of those subcommittees, to be an active board. And I wondered if I didn't see that in your PowerPoint, but I'm assuming that's what you're heading towards.
So it depends. Again, if we're looking at subcommittees that have 2 to 4 people, based on our current membership, it doesn't mean everybody's going to be on a subcommittee. To stay actively engaged, it would be ideal to have one board member on each subcommittee, but also understanding that may not be the case. So it's not an expectation or requirement necessarily. We're more looking at what's effective as far as that small group can really make work move forward. And it's really going to be kind of a self-selection to be involved in one of these with the intent of wanting to do the work. And then those who are not will be part of the full board meetings and still get same communication updates and all that in the full quarterly board meetings and do actions as a full board as well. But yeah, I wouldn't say there's an expectation. It'd be delightful, but we also don't want to have large subcommittees either, since we don't want to recreate a larger body that can't move some of that work forward too.
Well, I do think the tremendous engagement of the board members has been the greatest strength of the Oversight Board and has made it very vital. So I personally would hope that everyone on the board would participate in a subcommittee, even if they couldn't be there at every meeting, because I think that keeps people engaged and that's what makes a board effective.
Yeah, and I'll just echo, I mean, I think on the virtual platform that people's availability is far more accessible under these terms than it would be outside of what we're experiencing right now. And I too would hope that, you know, the majority of the board members would be on the subcommittees. I think that the board itself has such a diverse amount of experience and expertise that it would be important to have those captured in those subcommittees moving forward. So that's my thought too.
I'm wondering, I mean, I don't know how you do this formally, but can we make an agreement as this oversight committee and a commitment that there will be at least 2 folks on each of these subcommittees? I mean, that's 6 people. And maybe there can be like the people who are, I don't know sports metaphors, you know, but like those people who are up to bat, and then there's sort of the backup team, but that we could make that commitment to each other and to the public, that we will be engaged in these, because it just doesn't seem to make sense to me to not have each of these covered. So I second what Ruth and Sharada had to say.
So Annie, that's a great question. I'd like to address that. We did talk about the subcommittees. We wanted to keep them somewhat small because a smaller group could be more efficient, to bring it back to the board, you know, to maybe to work it out or find some answers we're looking for. But we did was it suggested that on the subcommittees that we have at least 1 board member on the committee to chair the committee. We thought that would be appropriate because we could, you know, obviously we'll have stakeholders there. So we thought it was appropriate to have a board member to chair the committee. And, you know, we thought 2 board members would be adequate. But, you know, on the same token, we realized how busy our world is. Some people have more time than others. And we wanted to set it up to where we would have engagement and activity and results without, you know, putting too much of a load on folks and then losing them. So, because that happens, you know, it's hard to keep volunteers, and, you know, really this oversight committee is a volunteer program. So that's kind of where that was the discussion we had, and it's up to this board then to decide where you'd like to proceed.
So I was interested, and thank you, Representative Dent, for how you got to the 2 to 4 members, because it did seem quite small to me. However, I think in kind of just thinking ahead, I think that redundancy is not necessarily a bad thing. Speaking as somebody that has a lot of scheduling conflicts, that it may not be a bad thing to have a slightly larger subcommittee. And I'm not talking big, I'm talking like maybe 4 to 6 or something like that, because sometimes people can't always make the meeting.
And I think that's kind of, yeah, and it almost echoes a little bit of what Annie was saying as far as having that kind of backup, those on deck a little bit. So I think that part of this also is just acknowledging what Representative Dent said. I know that there are some members that don't have as much flexibility in their schedule, so they might not be able to make that commitment, but it doesn't mean we can't, if you're interested in a subcommittee, couldn't include you on that roster, and that when you are able to engage, you can, but we just want to make sure we have a core amount of subcommittee members that really help carry this work forward, and it doesn't get lost by one or two that might, we don't want to go back to the school days where you hate group work because no one else does the work, but it's left to you to do the work, right? So, so that's, yeah. So I just want to echo both. I think we're all kind of on the same page with that. I don't want, and Representative Dent, please let me know if you're thinking differently, but I don't think there's a max cap beyond the Open Public Meetings Act cap, which is majority of board members. So we don't want to half the board on one subcommittee. So there's not necessarily a cap at the max, but we just want to have a minimum and make sure it's an effective group that does engage and participate in a meaningful way consistently.
That's right. That's exactly how we discussed it, Krista.
That was a great segue to our last slide for this part of the agenda, which is really to talk about recruitment. So there's a few ways we could do this. We could have individual board members say now which subcommittee they're interested in, or obviously you can always email and let staff know as well. And then what the next steps would be. We hope to get this knowledge of what that interest is sooner than later, with the hope of having our first meeting next month to really start looking in the strategic plan measures. So once we get an idea of what that core group would be, we would be working with staff, particularly Nicholas would be working to do doodle polls to make sure we could accommodate the subcommittee schedules in a good way that would make it productive for everybody that would be interested in being on a subcommittee. And then we'd start working on developing those agendas to get this work rolling.
Well, I guess we should probably put out a motion that we would accept this framework as a board. And then from there, if it's accepted, then move into seeing who would like to be on the
I will so
committees or on a
move.
motion.
I will so move that we accept this recommendation.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Now we should,
Aye.
now we, let's follow protocol. After we have a motion and a second, we need to ask for further discussion.
Oh, okay. Thank you to Representative Dent.
Yes, ma'am.
Further discussion?
Hearing none.
Okay, and then would the protocol then be,
Now we
Now
can
we
vote.
vote. Now we vote.
okay, so all in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Fantastic. It looks like it is passed. I would suggest that we go into recruitment. It's not a, you have to do that right now if you want to send something over to Krista, but I think since we're here together and to utilize our time effectively, maybe if there's a subcommittee that you're interested in. So I'm just going to kind of go through the list, and then if you're interested, if you could either just say I am interested, and I'm sure Krista's taking fantastic notes because that's what she's really great. So who's interested in doing the early childhood development and primary prevention? I see Diana, Ruth Kagi.
And I'm sure Lois might be interested.
Let's see here. I want to knock on her little square here. Okay, we'll leave that open. And then on the child safety and family reconciliation, myself,
You can sign me up, Ben.
Charles, Loeffler, Ben, Katie Byron. And then we will go to adolescence and outcomes. Annie Lee, Bobby Bridge, Annie Blackledge. All right, and then like I said, if you decide that there's a committee you want to be on, please just email Krista. It looks like the next item is to look at actually scheduling some of those subcommittee meetings. I don't know, do we want to look at that now? Do we want to do doodle polls? All right, I'm open.
Yeah, we'll do doodle polls. So I think what we'll do is I'll send an email out to the full board, probably tomorrow, probably won't go out tonight, but tomorrow, and just say, these are the subcommittees and who's identified that they want to be a part of them, just to verify, and also open it up for anyone that hasn't stated currently that they want to join a subcommittee, might want to. And then Nicholas and I will do doodle polls with those who've said that they want to, and start from there. So if someone does even want to join later, we can also, there's always meeting times will be set, or so on and so forth. But that'll be our next steps as far as pulling that together and scheduling and opening it for other board members to say if they're interested.
So is there more stakeholders that aren't included in this meeting tonight that we might want to reach out to see if they want to participate?
I think that, so we'll work with the subcommittee members to navigate how we do that stakeholder engagement work.
Okay.
But we'll definitely also get it on our website. Like I said, we're going to build it out on our website, and then we can send out a notification over our Gov delivery as well to announce that we're doing the subcommittee structure, so it gets out there. And then we can definitely encourage questions or interested stakeholders that want to engage with those subcommittees in different ways, and do that offline. Yeah.
Perfect.
Real quick, this is Lonnie. I actually don't have a preference on which subcommittee I sit on. So if there is one that needs an extra body, please assign me there.
Okay.
So
yeah.
It looks like, Krista, when I'm looking at the time, we have public comment at 6:45, and we have gotten through this fairly quickly. So I am not sure how to proceed. Do you have a suggestion here?
Nicholas, has anyone identified that they want to participate in public comment already?
Yes, I have 2 people currently, and I see 1 person on currently.
So what we could do is we could either ask Patrick, since we have, because Patrick, you're here, right? Yes, Patrick Willier. We could see if Patrick's interested in doing his presentation, which is supposed to be about a half an hour. So we could do that now and then keep public comment at 6:45. Or we could also ask those that are available for public comment now and then touch in a little bit later just to make sure if anyone wanted to make a comment. So it's Patrick, or I guess I should ask you first. Would you be willing to do your presentation now since we're a little ahead of time?
You can slide me in wherever works best for the board.
Okay. So Sean, if that works, because knowing that the public comment might not show up until actual public comment time on the agenda, would you prefer to do that? It looks like.
Yeah, I think I think it'd be great if Patrick went now, and that we have the time that if someone wanted to come at 6:45, that we didn't overlook that for that. So yes.
Great. Well, we'll do that, and I'll hand the co-chairs want to introduce Patrick, and we'll just shuffle our agenda around a little bit, and we'll go from there.
So Patrick is actually from the Office of Family, Children and Ombudsman. He is going to give us a briefing on the annual report. And here's Patrick. Hi, Patrick.
Hello, everyone. Let me see if I can share my screen to start with. All right, is that working for everyone? Okay, great. Well, good evening, members of the DCYF Oversight Board. By way of introduction, my name is Patrick Dowd. I'm the Director of the Office of the Family and Children's Ombuds. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to present information about our office and more specifically, our 2020 annual report. Let's see here. All right, I won't spend a lot of time on background. I think most of you are familiar with our office. We're relatively small. We have a staff of 6 FTEs. 4 of them are ombuds, and we respond to concerns about the child welfare system statewide. Our primary function and why we were created was, like the board, to provide independent oversight of the child welfare system. Some key characteristics of our office is that we're independent. We're located in the governor's office, separate from the Department of Children, Youth, and Families. The director position, while appointed by the governor, is confirmed by the Senate. So there's also legislative oversight of our office. And we also respond to inquiries and by the Department of Children, Youth, and Families Oversight Board. In fact, we're charged with sharing confidential information with the board, and the board is then bound by the same confidentiality requirements as our office is. We're impartial. We don't act as advocates on for an individual. When we testify on proposed legislation, we always take a neutral position, although we may identify strengths of particular legislation, and we have a very confidential review process. We're empowered to investigate complaints. When we find a problem with the department that they're not following state law, agency policy, or court orders, or exercising their discretion in a reasonable manner, we have the authority to go up the chain within the department to attempt to resolve or prevent harmful agency conduct or actions. The department is not required to follow our recommendations, but because we do have a credible review process, I'd say about 90% of the times when we identify an issue, the department is responsive to our requests and recommendations. And then we also issue reports to the governor and to the legislature, identify systemic issues and make recommendations. And we're also involved in the child fatality and near fatality review process. So this slide shows the complaints that we've received over the last 10 years. There was a significant jump in 2014, which aligned with us kind of catching up with technology and having our complaint form available on our website. We did note a slight decrease in 2020. And it was enough, so I started looking, well, this is interesting. And I looked at the department's data, and it seems to parallel with also a reduction in reports of child abuse or neglect to CPS intake, a commensurate reduction in the number of intakes that are accepted for investigation by CPS in 2020, and similarly a decrease in the number of children in 2020 that were taken into state care. So I think that is the closest explanation that I can make for the dip in complaints to our office this past year. So the next few slides will get into, again, a systemic issue that, as this slide indicates, we've been tracking for a number of years. And frankly, in 2016, when I saw the number of placement exceptions, which is the term of art for situations where the department is unable to place a child in either with a relative or in a licensed placement, and the child is placed either in a hotel or in an office overnight, that requires administrative approval, and it's described as a placement exception. It also produces a specific report on each incident, and our office receives those basically the same day or within 24 hours of the placement exception. So in 2016, when I saw the placement exceptions jump from a little over 100 in 2015 to nearly 900 in 1 year, I thought I was sounding the cry of alarm, reminiscent of Paul Revere's Ride, and yet it was not solved in 2016 or 2017, 18, 19, and 2020. We've seen the number continue to grow. And in fact, in 2020, it was like a 23% increase from 2019. A positive is that the number of children that experienced a placement exception in 2020 actually decreased. There were 220 children in 2020 that were subjected to a placement exception, and that was down from slightly over 280 children in 2019. And also to put this a little bit in perspective, at kind of any given time, any snapshot, there might be about 8,000 children in out-of-home care in Washington State. So out of that pool, we're talking about in this year, 220 that experienced a placement exception. That does not minimize the problem for obviously for those 220 children and their families or the traumatic impact for those children, but rather I think it does, in my mind, indicate that this is something that we should be able to fix, again, because we're talking about a relatively small number of children. And then in later slides, as we'll see, when we drill down a little bit more, that number of children that are really driving this problem even becomes smaller. Now, this slide shows the hotel and office days by month for our reporting year from September to August of 2020. And I think it is noteworthy that in March, April, May, we saw and ongoing after COVID-19, things got worse. And part of that, I think, is due to the impact on foster parents and placement resources within the department that because of the pandemic, we're not in a position to accept new placements into their home or their facility. Now, the majority of the placement exceptions occur in hotels. Some occur in DCYF offices. And this past year, there were 284. So this, again, the vast majority are of the placement exceptions or hotel stays. There was documentation of 2 placements in vehicles. And I want to talk about this in a little bit. Our office also received a complaint alleging that the department had used placement in a vehicle in a punitive manner for a youth that was refusing placement or failing to cooperate with the department. And we substantiated that, yes, the youth spent the night in a vehicle, or the majority of the night. We did not substantiate that it was done for punitive reasons. And in fact, the narrative we got back from the department was more benign, that the youth was offered a placement, that they transported the youth to a placement. Upon arriving at the placement and meeting with staff and hearing the rules, the youth refused to reside in that placement, transported back to the office, tried to make another placement, youth refused that placement, et cetera. So, you know, on one hand, from the youth's perspective or the complainant's perspective, this was punitive. From the department's perspective, this is just how attempts to place the child in a licensed facility kind of played out. Our bottom line was that we should be able to do better and make sure that the majority of the night is not spent even transporting the youth in a vehicle and finding a way to work out whether or not a placement will be acceptable to a youth without involving transporting the child around the county for the duration of the night. 16 of the placement exceptions are listed as other, and that reflects that, again, the majority of these reports that we receive, they identify this occurred in an office and here's why, or this occurred in a hotel and the youth was supervised by after-hours staff and a security officer, et cetera. Occasionally, we will receive a report that is does not identify the site of the placement. It simply says youth experienced a placement exception. The department was unable to locate a licensed placement for the following reasons and give a little bit more information, but not identify the location of the placement exception. So then we looked at, okay, where are these office placements occurring. And I thought this was interesting. Of the 286 office placements, 243 of them were in Region 6, which is Thurston County, Lewis County, Skamania County, Clark County, around the southwest corner of the state and up through the Olympic Peninsula, both east and west sides of the peninsula. And what we found in talking to region staff administration is this was a kind of a strategic plan to dealing with the pandemic. And how do we meet the needs of the youth that are not able to, we don't have a licensed placement for, and or youth that have been on the run and are coming back into care, and we don't know if they've been exposed or not. And how do we safeguard staff, youth, and children kind of in that scenario? And what Region 6 came up with, not for all of their placement exceptions, but for a lot of them, was to, if there was a concern of exposure to COVID-19, then let's utilize office space within a DCYF office, and they would convert a visitation room, provide a cot, blankets, etc. The visitation room would be, sanitized before and after it was used as an overnight facility for the child. The offices were equipped with showers, laundry facilities, etc. So, frankly, I thought it was somewhat of an innovative approach by the agency to deal with what is, by all accounts, an untenable kind of situation made worse by COVID-19. So I mentioned that, when we talked about the 220 children, that should be a manageable number of children to solve this problem. This slide kind of puts it in a little bit more of a context and shows that the majority of the children experiencing a placement exception, and that's the first two columns, children that spend one night in a placement exception, and the second column that spend 2 to 5 nights, that's over 140 of the 220 children that experience a placement exception. So for those children, it's a relatively short period of time, and then they move on to an approved, licensed, or relative placement. What's really driving these numbers, the 1,800 or nearly 1,900 placement exceptions, are the last three columns. Children that spend 6 or more nights, and in particular, the 24 children that spend 20 or more nights in placement exceptions. These are usually older children, and again, the last two columns, that makes up 75% of the placement exceptions, and we're talking about 43 children. So I think we should be able to solve the placement needs for 43 children. Now, granted, these are older children that have very high needs, and in the next slide, we'll kind of talk about that. And they'll require a high level of therapeutic care, but it's something that we should be able to accomplish. So when we look at the children that spent 20 or more nights in placement exceptions, we do see that they have very acute behavioral needs, mental health needs, physically aggressive or violent behavior, self-harm, suicidal ideation, history of running from placement. Some of them have sexualized or sexually acting out behaviors that make them more difficult to place. Many of these children are also involved in multiple systems. Quickly, the majority of these children are kind of under the supervision, care, and authority of the Department of Children, Youth, and Families, but not all of them. Some of them come into these placement exceptions without current involvement with the Department of Children, Youth, and Families. And that's a situation where A youth is admitted to a psychiatric unit at Children's Hospital, for example, on an involuntary commitment. Child is ready to be discharged because he or she is no longer a threat to his or her immediate safety, but because of the dynamics, the family is unable to meet the child's needs in the home. And anecdotally, we've heard that other professionals are advising the parents, if you refuse to pick up the child when the child's ready for discharge from the hospital, well, then CPS will come in and find a placement. So there's some of these children, again, would be better served in kind of other systems. We also have children that are involved in the juvenile justice system or juvenile rehabilitation. And I don't think we're doing sufficient planning in some of those other systems to meet the child's needs, and then their placement issues become a crisis. When we look at those, again, the children that spend 20 or more nights, and we looked at, okay, what happened after a placement was found? And of those, I think it was 24 children. At the time we wrote the report, 5 remained in placement exceptions. So that left 19, and then of those children, 11 of them were placed in BRS, foster homes, or group care. And 2 were placed in a children's psychiatric hospital. Again, I think this focuses on the type of placement resources that we need to really devote attention to address this problem. So this slide kind of breaks down race and ethnicity of children experiencing placement exceptions. And we track this in every report. I kind of hesitate to make broad conclusions. One, I'm not a statistician, and I do recognize that we're talking about a relatively small number of children. And this year was 220 children, and you could have one sibling group of 7 or 8 children that could really skew numbers one way or the other. But I think it is noteworthy, and when I should have included this slide, but I also looked at not just 2020, but went back over the last 4 or 5 years. And it was consistent. Every year, Black and African-American children were overrepresented in placement exceptions compared to the middle column, which is kind of their representation in regions 4 and 6. And I picked those 2 regions because that's where most of the placement exceptions occurred. And then by way of comparison, also the percentage of race ethnicity for all children in out-of-home care in Washington State. What was also interesting is American Indian or Alaskan Native children experienced placement exceptions at a lower rate than compared to their out-of-home care kind of placement rates, either in Region 4-6 or in Washington State. And I thought that was interesting. And again, it wasn't just for 2020, it was for every year for the last 4 years. And again, we're not talking about huge numbers. I qualify it. I hesitate to draw any huge conclusions. But one thing I thought about is the application of the Indian Child Welfare Act and the focus on placing Native American children with family and relatives. And perhaps this demonstrates that at least for Native American families, there's a greater commitment to hang in there with children and maintain stability of those placements. I don't have any data to back that up. It's just speculation on my part, but I thought it was interesting. So in previous reports, we recommended that the system needs to expand the continuum of placement resources. Again, focus on therapeutic placements to meet the needs of children that are really driving these placement exceptions, and also to provide support services for foster parents to try to stabilize children so they don't disrupt from placement. In our 2020 annual report, we were not abandoning our previous recommendations by any means, but we also recognized, look, this has not changed. In fact, it's gotten worse. So until we identify a permanent solution to this problem, let's try to normalize hotel stays and office stays and provide a more stable and supportive environment for the youth. So what that might mean is, instead of a youth going night to night from the office to the hotel, and then 7 in the morning going back to the office and hanging out in the office and then going back to the hotel, for many of these children, we know they're waiting for a group home. They're waiting for a clip bed. That's not going to happen tomorrow, and it might not happen within the next 3 or 4 days. So why not stabilize the youth in that hotel, have dedicated staff that would be with that youth or youth for that period of time, and similarly set up areas within DCYF offices where a youth would be able to kind of log on and do schoolwork or engage in productive, activities. And finally, let's ensure that, even though it was only a few cases, let's ensure that we're not transporting children all hours of the evening and having them sleep in cars. I do want to comment the recommendation about normalizing hotel stays. That was developed in meeting with children and adolescent advocates. And one is Tara Ers and other attorneys that she works with. So I certainly want to acknowledge their contribution to our report and recommendations. Before I move on to a few last comments on the impact of COVID-19, are there any questions about the hotel stay issue?
Patrick, this is Ben. I do have a question. Obviously, things have been getting worse over time, as you've pointed out so well. And the problem driver seems to be the 20 or more placement children who have high needs, behavioral health issues. Why, that doesn't explain to me why the situation has gotten so much worse over the years, unless we've had dramatic shifts in the complexity of children's behavioral health needs and a reduction in more appropriate resources. What do you think is driving this? Are children getting more problematic, or has there been a policy shift or a higher degree of acceptance of children spending multiple nights in these conditions?
And or perhaps, I think, Ben, you said the resources available to them as far as placements. Sorry, this is Charles. I know on the ground we've seen closures of behavioral focused facilities.
So, Charles, what you're reporting is that the resources that used to be available, group homes, therapeutic settings for these high needs children, just aren't available anymore.
I mean, that's my anecdotal experience, but I would put that as part of your question, is what I was hoping.
And to Charles' point, I think Ryther is a good example of that. I don't have the exact data, if it was last year or even the year before, that they decided they would no longer accept state children, if you will, because the payment rates did not adequately cover the cost of providing care. I do want to mention that in the 2020 legislative session, the supplemental budget allocated funds to address this issue. And they did rate, they did raise the rate for behavioral rehabilitation service providers. And as a result of that, DCYF has added additional BRS placements. But what I'm not really clear on is it a net gain, or are we still operating at a net loss with the beds that we lost because the rates had not kept up with the cost of care? Additionally, the supplemental budget included funding for a category of BRS plus, or a higher level of therapeutic care. Because of the pandemic, I think the department ran into some barriers in bringing those additional BRS plus placements online. And I believe I heard that the department hopes to have those services on board by March of this year. But it's, I think, Ben, to your comment, there are other kind of systems that need to, I think, step up, including the healthcare authority. And that sounds that I'm disparaging the healthcare authority. I don't. That's not my intent. But I think, for example, we need more CLIP beds, or children's long-term inpatient programs with children with psychiatric needs and require long-term inpatient care. I think there are children that need services through Developmental Disabilities Administration and placement resources through that agency as well. I think there needs to be better planning and communication between DCYF and Healthcare Authority and the Developmental Disabilities Administration to ensure that these children, that their needs are being met. So I'm not sure, Ben, if that answers your question. And you know, again, I go back to what I don't know is, are we looking at a net gain, or are we still operating at a net loss of the types of therapeutic placement resources that we used to have?
No, Patrick, I think you did answer my question very well, and that is that this is a very complicated problem, even though the numbers are very, very small, and the behavioral health systems are stressed with all populations, and it isn't an easy situation to fix. I know that Secretary Hunter has been really focused in on this, and it sounds like people are working on it. You would expect these numbers to drop, then, it would sound like, by the end of 2021, or at least we're hoping to see that.
I certainly hope to see them drop.
So
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm going to interrupt real quick. And then Patrick, we just want to respect those that did maybe join just for public comment. Is this your last slide, or do you have a few more slides?
Yeah, this is my last slide. A few comments on the impact of COVID-19. There's been a decline in CPS intakes that commensurate with children being out of school and not being in the presence of mandated reporters, school staff, et cetera. What that means, we don't know. Whether or not children are being subjected to abuse or neglect and it's going unreported or not, I guess eventually we will see. It's had an impact on the department's ability to everything from conducting CPS investigations and health and safety visits. I mentioned placement resources. I think in King County, 30% of licensed foster parents indicated that they were unable to accept new placements because of the pandemic. And then also on family reunification, the impact on visitation and parents having remote visits with their children. That might be feasible for older children. I think it'd be awfully difficult for a parent to have effectively a remote visit with an infant or a toddler. and the impact on families on reunification services, employment, housing, et cetera. So in the interest of time, that pretty much wraps up my presentation. I'll end with my contact information. And again, thank you very much.
And Patrick, I don't want to rush you off. If we do public comment, are you willing to stick around if the board members have additional questions
Certainly.
after that?
Yes.
Okay. So maybe we'll do that. We'll just transition and hand it over to Nicholas to manage public comment, and then we'll reopen it back up for board members that have additional questions on the plethora of information that Patrick just provided us as well. Thank you, Patrick. So Nicholas, do you want to go ahead and do public comment for us?
Yeah. All right. So first up for public comment, we have Lori Lippold. So Lori, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. I'm Lori Lippold with Partners for Our Children, and I'll be very quick. I just want to congratulate Sharonda and Representative Dent on their new positions. I think it's very exciting, and it does sound like it's a great time with the direction that the Oversight Board is talking about going in. So welcome, and it's going to be fun to watch the Oversight Board's work under your leadership. So to me, it sounds like the plan that you have is very good, makes a lot of sense. I do wonder about a couple of things, and that is whether some of the other, I don't know, I'll just say requirements, if you will, in the statute related to the role of the Oversight Board, if though, for example, and I just was looking at something to remind myself, but really looking at how statutes, other policies, et cetera, are being implemented. And I know you can't go back and do everything, but let's just say there's something that's passed this session. I'll use as an example, the child-specific license for kinship caregivers. If the legislature passes that, and the Oversight Board is wanting to monitor it, and see if it's being implemented, would that happen at a general Oversight Board meeting? Not at all, through one of the subcommittees. So I was just a little bit curious about some of the other duties as assigned, if you will. But I'm excited. I will also just say I'm a little confused about the stakeholder/community involvement in the subcommittees or in the committees, but I have confidence that that's going to be worked out and everything will be fine with that. So anyway, I was just curious about the other things mainly. And thank you so much for all of what you're doing, and Representative Kagi and Representative Sen for your great leadership and being the two firsts. I would imagine it's never easy to be the ones who are there in the very beginning. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Lori. Next up, signed up for public comment, we have Jim Theophilus.
Good evening, everyone. Jim Theophilus. Welcome to the 21st day of the 21st year of the 21st century. So those of you who are horse bettors, 21. First, I do want to say, and some of this will be redundant, so I apologize. Lori and I really don't choreograph this before we come on, but I do want to start by thanking Representative Kagi and Representative Sen for really the foundational leadership that set this vision in motion. And I just can't say enough. I'm equally excited about Representative Dent and Sharonda and the leadership as you bring this work to the next chapter. I am hoping my comments come across as intended, which is really to be your cheerleader and your best frenemy. I remember when this was a concept and then legislation and we were moving it. And quite frankly, the number one sort of pushback question that I remember was, well, what if nothing does change? What if this is just moving the proverbial deck chairs around? And my first response to that was, well, one of the things that's going to be great about the new department is there'll be a secretary who's on the cabinet level that reports directly to the governor around the needs of children, youth, and families. And that seemed powerful to me, rather than the old model where they had to go through DSHS and compete with all these other things to see what DSHS secretary would elevate. So to me, that was very powerful. But my second answer, quite frankly, was there's going to be an oversight board. There's going to be an entity that is really going to support and challenge, a frenemy again, if you will, to DCYF and the secretary. And I just really, in light of the conversation at the beginning, I'm really appreciative around embracing that role, because again, for me, it's not personal. It's not, I still have confidence, a great deal of confidence in Secretary Hunter and his staff, that they're doing what they can do. And yet I still, to use a term I learned from Dr. DeHaan, the North Star, where do we want to be 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? And I think one of the places that the oversight board can be is a culture and a legacy of its own of being a good cheerleader and frenemy, but also being that accountability agent to whoever is in the secretary role and running the Department of Children, Youth, and Families at that time. So I just really, again, I hope this doesn't come across as piling on. I, quite frankly, am glad the governor rejected the report. I think that's a clear statement about get grounded in the fundamental performance measures. And then, yes, how do you add work? Because you're all very creative and hardworking folks. So I'm sure that there'll always be an appetite for an added agenda or item, as Lori suggested. But what's the fundamental role of helping this department have a culture that is responsive to children, youth, and families? And to Annie's earlier point, that's not just quantitative, that's also qualitative and hearing from lived experience. So I will, again, the second most honest thing I can say is we've had a history of struggling to get good data, quantitative and qualitative, from then Children's Administration. So this is, you can be that forcing agent for them to get better at being able to track what they need to track. We're much better with extended foster care, but it has been a lot of work to get them to be able to say how many young people are uptaking and entering this important program vis-a-vis how many don't even know about it because their social worker didn't tell them. So I just think there are so many areas where to help them get better at tracking key performance measures and then reporting out on that. And even if they're not great at it at the beginning, I think our role, your role, is to help them get better at it so that they can kick this information out. So again, I thank you for embracing that and your robust conversation around that. I will say, as far as the subcommittee thing, I really appreciate the leadership from Krista and others to sort of bring that to you. I really appreciate, obviously, the focus on the adolescent outcomes and transitions. We want babies to come in, and if we can, let's get them back home as soon as we can. And for the adolescent, if they're going to age out of this system, then it really is, how are we helping them prepare for that? How are we transitioning them out into the world? And Andy Blackledge and myself and others are involved in some conversations with Representative Chop's office about some legislation in concert with the DCYF folks. So I really do appreciate that. The other thing that's good about you being grounded in your performance measures, and I'll close with this, is it does protect you from what somebody said, like everybody's got an idea, and I am guilty of that, and I'll prove it here. So if you're grounded in your performance measures, then that's a response. When Jim says, hey, I got this idea, why don't you guys do this? You can talk about being grounded in these performance measures. But I don't know, the subcommittee does seem like an opportunity to get community folks involved without being formal members of the actual oversight committee. So I don't know if I think I kind of heard that conversation. But it does seem like as you look at stakeholder engagement, there may be some folks who are interested in that particular subject. Again, I close by thanking you all. Lori and I are bouncing. Representative Chop and Representative Davis also have a behavioral health work group meeting going on right now, which is why I toggled back and forth. So thank you so much for your good work and for being the champions for children, youth, and families that you are. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim, for your comment. And next up for public comment, we have Jill May.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I need to reach out to Nicholas first and never go behind Jim and Lori. But I too want to thank Representative Kiggy and Representative Sen for their work and congratulate Sharonda and Representative Dent. I've really appreciated the conversation and the idea around the subgroups. I've appreciated the comments about including youth and families and providers. I know it's been said before that at times providers are, maybe fearful, maybe that's not the right word, to share some of their concerns publicly. So hopefully this will be an opportunity for them to do that. I also want to just say is that I should have first said I'm Jill May with the Washington Association for Children and Families. Sorry. And I represent a provider agencies. And, Jim's point about frenemies, like, we really want to be good partners. We really want to work together. We're all here for the same reasons, which is good outcomes for children and families. So I'm hoping that the subgroup will be an opportunity for us to all work together. I appreciated the comments about qualitative and quantitative data. I also am in a situation frequently of challenging the department, but I do want to say to Patrick's report, the department did reach out to us and providers to have conversations about the hotel stay challenge. They asked for our feedback. We responded with the points in Patrick's report, the ombudsman's report. So I have to say they have reached out to us. They are partnering with us. They've asked us for additional information. So I really appreciate that. And want to point out when things are working. So thank you all for your hard work. And I look forward to further meetings. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Jill. So with that wraps up public comment. So I will push it back over to Krista.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for public comment. I don't want to step on the co-chair's toes here either, but just wanted to get us back to the agenda item 2 and open it if Patrick is willing to answer any questions Oversight Board members have about what they were just presented on or any other discussion points around what Patrick provided the board.
I have a question. Patrick, have you had any discussions with other states about whether they are experiencing this same surge in inability to place youth, and what some of the have other states have found innovative solutions that we could look to?
Yes and no. So yes, I have had conversations with other state ombuds programs that are dealing with the same issue in their child welfare system. And I've asked that same question about, like, well, what are you solving this? What are you doing? And I haven't found any state that has come up with any response to kind of address and this problem. I don't know kind of specifics as far as, like, well, increase in like BRS placements, for example, but I know it's not unique to Washington State.
Do you have a sense of how many of these youth have disabilities?
I don't. I could see if we could break that down and find out how many. Yeah, so we haven't broken down, how many need, for example, a BRS placement or a CLIP placement or a, services through developmental disabilities.
And I think it gets a little bit to the underfunding of both special education, but also the perverse incentive for DDA to not have youth with developmental disabilities in the in the DDA system, but rather in the foster care system, since foster care is an entitlement. And how do we switch that incentive, or how do we recognize that the budget needs to help drive that, because it's both a financial issue and an outcome issue that would be better. But right now, again, I think there's a perverse incentive, and just the, you know, undiagnosed underlying issues that might be there for some of these kids. Thank you.
I'm hoping I can just piggyback on this, and this may seem a little far afield, but having a little bit of personal experience with the cross between DD and foster care with my brother. And I know it's a small amount of young people and children, but I'd like to know how many of them are placed with siblings. Like, are there young people who are comparable to the young people who are being served in these not out of home placements, these odd hotel motel stay placements, if there is any kind of correlation there between, or I guess it wouldn't be correlation, it's too small. And sorry, I got a dog in my face right now. But I'm just wondering if there's something there, and if that would be too difficult to try to find out, or not valuable enough information because the number is so small.
Annie, that's a good question. I think the department just deals with it on a case-by-case basis. And they make a call as to whether, you know, certain children can safely share a hotel room with other children. But I think it really varies from office to office and even case by case.
I'm wondering about young people who are of similar demographics and with similar issues, if they're placed with siblings, if they're more stably placed.
Yeah.
Versus maybe young people who are not, or who are experiencing this, who have been separated from siblings, but it may be too small. So I won't belabor that anymore, but I think it's something to think about.
Are any other questions out there?
Yeah, I have one, and I'm not sure how to articulate it, because I don't even know whether this is under your purview, but I guess I have COVID on my mind, and also an article which indicated, well, anyway, about a week ago in the Seattle Times, the primary provider of information for the article was Dawn Rains from Treehouse. And the outcome we're looking at is education. And so I don't know if this fits even in your purview, but because I don't think it would be the subject of a complaint, but where would we be looking at? And then period. And then there's this same issue, it seems to me, is relevant to hotel stays, and particularly lengthy hotel stays. How are we ensuring, or are we looking at, how are we ensuring educational, the provision of education and educational outcomes for these kids, for foster kids, when they are in these placements, which are exceptional placements, and or over the period of COVID, have we looked at issues pertaining to our inability as a system to ensure that these kids are having stable / sustainable educational outcomes?
That's a good question. And next week, I am meeting with Carrie Bassis, the Office of the Education Ombuds, to discuss this very issue. And what I think is often going on is many of these children disrupted from a placement, and the department doesn't know where they will be going next. And that creates a gap in where should we enroll the child if we don't know where the child will be next. And too often, I think the department's attention is just on the placement, understandably solving that problem, and their education needs is is in the second chair. So, and in conversations I had with Carrie was that, no, they should be able to get them in a school program. There should be an education liaison, and this is something that we're trying to partner with the Education Ombuds Office on.
Right. Well, yes, I totally, well, I would hope so, because, you know, the placement issue, absolutely, that's the immediate in your face issue. Secondarily, obviously, and very close secondary, is the provision of whatever behavioral health kinds of treatments, interventions, et cetera, are necessary. But if we forget about education and some kind of consistency in that, we're still not attending to the well-being of the child.
And also it's aligned with normalizing these placement exceptions for the children while they're in that interim kind of period. School attendance, even if it's on remote or online, could be a source of stability for them.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks.
This is Annie Lee. Thanks for a really thorough report, Patrick. I had you made a mention, and this is a scenario that comes up sadly more often than we like to see in our casework at Team Child. There's a challenge, I think, as you already identified, of some gaps between responsibility in terms of DDE or behavioral health and DCYF. And in our work, we oftentimes see the juvenile justice involvement being another system structure that its beginning and end creates a gap between the beginning and end of transition to another system of care. So I don't know if the motel hotel stays are catching some of the things that we see as big chasms between systems of support, because it's oftentimes even in, you know, seeing a scenario where a young person is in detention and trying to find a placement so that they could be so they could stay out of JR, for example. They have the same issues, behavioral health issues and economic issues and housing issues, and because they're not formally part of the department's purview because a dependency hasn't been filed, they may not even benefit from the stopgap measure and still have really significant needs that then turn into longer term needs and eventually into dependency individual. So I'm curious about your office's hearing about those challenges of the gap between formal DCYF involvement and not, and families that are struggling to try to figure out how to patch together FRS type services to avoid dependency. We see a lot of times that the only option is a motel hotel stay, and that's even not available. So I wonder if there's even still some underrepresentation in the high needs grouping of young people who for whom, you know, I think the department is trying to figure out like how to find a good landing spot.
So where we see it is one is children that are not dependent or under DCYF authority, but the child is being they're being released from a detention facility, and the parent is refusing to pick up the child. And then that, again, this is and it always happens on a Friday evening at 5 o'clock, of course. And so that's kind of one scenario that falls into this whole placement exception problem. And of course, there's pending criminal matters, and maybe someone within the family was a victim, and that complicates placing the child kind of back in the home. So that's kind of one piece that we see. And then the other would be children that are involved in the foster care system already and then become involved within the juvenile justice system. And my personal view is that the department should almost be acting as a parent advocate for the child in determining maybe JRA is not the best placement, and as a parent, I want to find another alternative for the child rather than, well, this would be a placement issue off my desk if the child gets sent to a JRA facility. So there's that kind of that piece as well. I guess the third scenario we see are youth that are being released from a JRA facility and there was not adequate planning done for that next placement. And again, for whatever reason, the parents might not be able to have the child back in the home, but why that issue hadn't been addressed in the months leading up to the child's release from JRA, I don't know. And then they end up with, again, experiencing placement exceptions until an appropriate licensed home
It
is
seems to me this was one of the kinds. This is one of the kinds of scenarios that the organization of this department was devised to avoid, because it was not siloed. It was youth. You know, we have all of this under our big umbrella, and, you know, we're not going to have the kind of siloing that we had before. So you have, you know, it did depend on which door you were coming in. So it's a big deal, I think. I mean, it may be a small number of kids right now, but, you know, if we could make this work for those small number of kids, it would be a model for how overall kids, we look at the kid and not, well, let's see, which system is that child supposed to be responded to? It's the whole system.
Yeah, and I'm hopeful with the viewpoint that you have, Patrick, that this is solvable, and the examples you gave are really spot on to some of the things I think the department is working on. But with greater visibility, I think we can solve for those complicated issues so they're not as much of a surprise or a shock to whatever caseworker is working on it. So I thank you for indulging that question and fleshing out a little bit more of the nuances of kind of how young people show up. I think from their perspective, they don't care which system it is. I think they just want their needs met, and they want to feel safe and have some sense of like what tomorrow and the next week holds. And I think, you know, when the caseworkers aren't clear, it makes it super traumatic and hard for the young people. Everybody knows that, but I just think it's really important to remember that that these sort of push and pull things really have a huge impact on young people.
All right, any other comments for Patrick or questions? Well, once again, Patrick, thank you so much. The report is extremely informative, and we appreciate your time coming and educating us and sharing the information. Thank you so much. I know you've had a long day because I've been in a few other meetings with you, so thank you for coming tonight. I appreciate you.
Well, I get to see you again twice in one day. So thank you, Sharonda. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you, Patrick.
All right. Well, we're going to just look at, we've already done the recruitment. We've got another full board meeting scheduled on the 15th. Is there any other business that the board members would like to share in this moment before we kind of adjourn?
Sharonda, did you say the 15th of February? Is that still going to be happening if we're doing the?
No, so the full board meeting is going to be April 15th. We'll send out a doodle poll to schedule the subcommittee meetings. So there'll be something coming, and we'll certainly be having a meeting in February, but we'll be in our subcommittees, and then we'll come back to as a full board on April 15th. All right. Well, yes.
Sharonda?
Yes, Representative Dent.
Thank you. So, you know, what I'd like to say is, I'd like to say thank you to the board. You know, we came up with kind of a new idea to move forward, and you have seemingly embraced it. And I want you to know I really sincerely appreciate you doing that. I'm big on public-private partnerships and engaging as many people as we can. And I think that will do so. And the one thing that we've talked a lot about around this department and all the issues about children, foster care, whatever, is better outcomes. And I think what we've done tonight may put us on a path for better outcomes, you know, for our children and helping the DCYF. So I want to thank everybody for that. I sincerely appreciate your involvement, and you're willing to discuss and debate the issue a little bit, and looking forward to moving forward. Thank you.
Well, here's to 2021, getting outside and doing a different type of oversighting and moving forward. So we'll go ahead, if there's nothing else, we'll go ahead and adjourn and get 40 extra minutes that I don't know about you, but I wasn't anticipating, and I'm all about it. All right, we'll be adjourned. You guys be well.
Everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.